This is 24 in 42.
Welcome to 24 and 42. Today we are sitting down with Jeff Stewart, author of heroic fantasy and historical adventure fiction. And we are going to find out the answers to life, the universe, and everything Jeff through 24 questions in 42 minutes.
Ba-dum-bum.
Ba-bum-bum. All right, let's get rolling on these questions. I'm going to start a little timer right here, and we're off. Were you a city or a country kid? And where did you play out your fantastical adventures? And alone or with friends?
So I was a country kid. I grew up in rural Oregon in the Willamette Valley. So most of my adventures were played out by myself or with my brother in the backyard. Pick up a stick, and all of a sudden it became a sword, or after I'd seen light or Star Wars, it became a lightsaber, and I would just attack the trees in the backyard until there were no branches left. But I also played them out on the playground. I read the Outlaw of Torn by Edgar Rice Burroughs, and I've always been a King Arthur kid. Loved Knights in the Round Table. And so after I finished The Outlaw of Torn, I spent about a week, and I organized a bunch of kids on the playground. I made them swear an oath to, uphold the law, protect the weak, guard all women, and treat them with respect. And we ran around the playground having sword fights with imaginary enemies for the rest of that week. So I did a little bit of both, but definitely country kid, not city kid.
That's awesome, Outlaw of Torn. That's one of my favorite Burrow stories, and I actually have the Frazetta print on the wall behind me here.
Yeah, I've got mine upstairs.
Alrighty. So, I guess the next question is natural. Who is your favorite visual artist?
Well, again, I had to go do an empirical study. I had to walk through the house and, look around, see what I could find. And it turns out it has to be hands down 100% Frank Frazetta, because I've got 18? I've got 18 of his posters hanging in my house.
Holy cow.
To include one of the Roman legions. I don't know if you've seen it. There's a picture of Roman legionaries standing on a cliff looking out into the distance.
Yeah.
And just so happened to be the battalion I commanded when I was in the Army was called the Arctic Legion. And everything we had was Roman themed. So I had ordered that poster. I had it framed in a gilt gold, Romanesque type of frame, and that sat in my office behind my desk the entire time I was in command. So that holds prime of place for me because it has such emotional significance. But yeah, definitely Frank Frazetta. He's the guy that resonates with me. He's what I remember growing up. Reading Sword and Sorcery, he's the one that keyed me in. I don't know how many books I bought that were just because he had a cover on them. Whether I cared about the author or what it said, didn't matter. I just wanted that picture. And so that's what I bought.
That is awesome, but it really begs the question, why are we sitting in a room with flowers and plates hanging on the wall instead of Frazetta posters?
Because this is my wife's room, and all of mine are upstairs in the man cave where women do not go.
Well, I'm sure we have some women viewers in the audience, so okay, I understand.
Yeah.
All right, what color do you write
And they
in?
would certainly be welcome in the man cave.
Okay. What
Like
color?
Sarah Frazetta, I would love to take her into the man cave and see what she thought.
Oh my goodness. Well, with 18 posters, well, she's probably seen them all, so.
Yeah, I'm sure she has. But we'll call this, they've got the two Frank Frazetta museums, one in Pennsylvania, one in Florida.
Yep.
We'll call this one the Frank Frazetta Museum West.
Northwest, yep. All right.
There you go.
Very good. All right. What color do you write in?
Black and white. When I write, I look at what's on the screen. It's in black and white, so that's the color that I write in. I never even considered matching a color to the way I write. Although one of my answers later on will beg that question as to whether I do or not. But yeah, black and white right now.
Interesting. All right. Look forward to that one. Titles. Does creating a title come easy to you, and when does it usually happen? Does it initiate the story? Does it come up during the story, or after the story is all done?
I suck at titles. I just can't do them. I am terrible at them. I can never come up with something that captures the nature of the story or that is pithy. I always rely on the editor to do that for me because I'm terrible at it. So I'll do a work. I will give it a working title
Right.
that I then send forward. And it's kind of like the old Hollywood trope of it turns out to be planes on a, or snakes on a plane. You know, it's something stupid like that everybody's like, what the heck does that mean? Why would I ever watch this movie? And the editor, luckily, every time I've worked with him, has taken that, crafted it, and turned it into something good. The only two exceptions to that, the only two times I ever think the title came easy to me, the first one was the story that I did for you in As You Wish. And that was the Dowdy Dozen because I was trying to do a take on the Dirty Dozen.
Okay.
So I wanted to do a trope on that. I had 12 characters setting off on a quest. So I turned it into the Dowdy Dozen. And then the second one was the story I did for you with Neither Beg Nor Yield, because the theme of your anthology blended so well with this Gaelic phrase, bone in a croin, that means neither collar nor crown. I will never be anyone's servant. I will never serve a king. That I'll never be a slave. I'll always do my own thing. And so that resonated with me. It met great with your theme. So I picked that up, and that became the title of the story, Bone in a Croin.
Yeah, it absolutely fit. And I guess I should have said at the beginning that we have worked together before. Jeff's appeared in several of Rogue Blade's titles. Cool. All right, so titles are a little bit of a challenge to you. So good thing you got good editors.
Good thing.
Now, how do you go about giving depth to a character? And do you think there's any difference between a primary and a tertiary level character?
Yeah, I think giving depth to a character comes down to giving them particular traits, giving them characteristics, things that you can refer back to, because that's what catches a reader's eye. That's what helps them understand that. Obviously, you're going to do that more often with your primary characters. They're going to have more of those characteristics, you know, whether it's the way they look, whether it's the way they talk, whether it's the mannerisms they use, or maybe the weapons that they use. A tertiary character doesn't need that many. In fact, a lot of times with my tertiary characters, I just give them one characteristic. And in fact, a lot of times for my tertiary characters, I don't even give them a name. I just refer to that characteristic. So if I've got a character with a big nose that's running around causing problems for the hero, for the rest of the story, he's called Big Nose. But that automatically keys in to the reader. They know exactly who I'm talking about. They've pictured him in their mind. I don't need to do any more fulsome description because they've already done that. But the one thing that I forget about a lot of times, and I have to go back and rework, particularly when I'm doing a peer review with somebody on a story that I've written, they point out the fact that I don't put enough detail into the villain. And the villain has to drive the story. The villain is the person, and you hear this from actors all the time, right? They always talk about, oh, it's always better to play the bad guy than the good guy. The good guy's goody two shoes, and nobody pays any attention to him. It's fun to be the bad guy. And so you've got to give the villain that scope. You've got to give them those characteristics. You've got to give them that driving motivation that even if you don't agree with it, even if it's like world domination, right? I'm going to blow up the moon unless you give me $1 billion. You've got to understand why they're doing it. It's got to be logical. Otherwise, the story's not believable and the hero just comes off kind of two-dimensional.
Yeah.
So you've got to put that effort into building up that villain and making sure that they're there. I mean, because the other thing we always forget is every person is the hero of their own story.
Yeah,
so if you approach your villain from that perspective, yeah, he's a villain. He's doing bad things. He's got evil intentions. But in his mind, he's the hero of that story. So if you approach it from that, it helps build that foil for your main character, your protagonist, and helps give depth to both of them.
Right. Understood. And you're got to keep your villain at least at the level or higher than your hero.
Yeah,
Wouldn't be very fun reading a Conan story where his villain was the schoolyard bully.
no. Although I
All
may
right.
try that. That's a good idea for next story.
Comedy, huh? Okay, very important question. Waffles, French toast, pancakes, crepes, or bagels?
Yeah, pancakes. Totally on pancakes. Pancakes are so versatile. You can do anything with them. You've got your traditional style that you can do them with. You can, add sausage to it, turn it into pigs in a blanket. You can do different things. You can even take, so fun fact, if you take a pancake batter recipe and you double the amount of liquid you add to it, you now have crepes.
Okay.
So easy to do when you're out camping and you've got a box of Bisquick and you want to turn it into crepes. There you go. You've got it. You can look fancy and put butter on it and some fruit. And everybody thinks you're a French chef. Um, and then, the one story that always sticks with me, I was in the Sultanate of Oman. I was in the Command and General Staff School there. And we were out doing a staff ride, going through the desert, playing out fictitious battles. How would you arrange your troops? Where would you put them? Blah, blah, blah. And in the middle of the morning, we stopped and we decided to have breakfast. So there were probably 8 of us there, me and 7 Omanis. They pulled out a picnic blanket, set it up, got a plate out, and then from out of a cooler, they started getting pancakes. And they would put a pancake down, they would pour a layer of honey on top, put another pancake down. And they continued that till we had a layer of about 14 pancakes. Big, tall group, but I mean, you figure we're feeding 8 people, right? So there's a lot of food there. And then all of a sudden, they dug in. And when I say we dug in, we dug in. There were no eating utensils. There was no fork. There was no knife. Everybody just reached in and grabbed a hunk of pancake, ripped it off, and ate it. And the longer we went on eating this thing, obviously we're in the middle of the desert. The wind is blowing, and our hands just start to get coated with sand. And pretty soon it looks like we got sugar cookie hands. And I remember thinking to myself, I'm like, why the hell didn't we bring any eating utensils? I don't understand this. But even in those conditions, I've got to tell you, pancakes were delicious, and I really enjoyed it.
A little crunchy, but yeah, they had a cooler, so you could have brought
Yeah.
eating utensils. Hmm.
Well, nobody ever said we were the sharpest knives in the drawer.
I'll leave that one alone. All right. Timelines. What does your timeline look like from the time you conceive the story idea to research, if there's any, to first draft and final manuscript?
Yeah, the initial idea, the gestation to first draft, often takes quite a bit of time. I'll mull it over in my mind. It can be anywhere from weeks to potentially months as I try to think through, hey, how do I want to approach this? What do I want my characters to be like? How do I want to deal with the situation that they're faced with? That can take a long time. Typically, the research doesn't take very long, just a little odd bit here and there when I'm writing fantasy. When I'm writing historical, that's when it really becomes a distractor because I'm a historian by training. I delve into it. I go down those rabbit holes, and I'll spend more time researching, probably 70-80% more time researching than it takes to actually write the story. So it's easy for me to get distracted and go down that road just because I find the research fascinating by itself. Then when I sit down to write, the first draft comes pretty quickly. By the time I've got it in my head, it usually 1 to 3 days and I'm done with the first draft.
Wow.
Then I find myself, I have to set it aside. If I go back immediately and try to self-edit and, figure out what works and what didn't work, I'm still too close to the story. And what I see in my head isn't necessarily what's on the page. But I can't pick that up because I'm too close to the material. So I've got to set it aside for several weeks, then come back to it. Then I get to see it with a more fairly fresh set of eyes that lets me identify what the problems are, where the gaps are, where I thought I had filled in information and there's really nothing there. or where I spent too much time talking about something that doesn't matter to the story. So I would say from idea to final story, probably 3 months, but that includes all those various steps.
Sure. Okay. Interesting. Pretty thorough, actually. Um, which of the characters that you have created would you like to have as a best or close friend, and why?
Yeah, that one for me was actually fairly easy. That's Thorfinn Ironskin, who is the sidekick to Sigurd Grimbrow, one of my main characters that's been in a couple of Rogue Blades Entertainment books. They live in a fictitious Viking world, um, but Thorfinn Ironskin is one of those guys. He reminds me probably somewhat akin to Fafhrd from Fritz Leiber and Fafhrd and the Grey Mouser. He's just a guy that lives in the moment, right? He doesn't brood about the past. He doesn't worry about the future. He lives in where he's at right now. If it's time to go get drunk, let's go get drunk. If it's time to have a feast, let's eat everything we can find. If it's time to have a fight, okay, let's throw down, see what happens. He doesn't dwell on it. He doesn't worry about it. He just reacts to what's happened. And as such, he would be a carefree companion that was always there with you, would always be receptive to you, and would always support you no matter where you got. As opposed to some of my other characters who are a little bit darker, a little more brooding, that I'm not sure it would be fun to spend time around. That's just kind of the way they are. And you probably want to leave them alone. They're the kind of guys that, hey, if I'm going to get in a fight, I'll call him over, but otherwise I'm going to let him hang out in the corner and do his own thing, because he's not the fun guy to spend the night with.
Well, your character Thorfinn, is that how you say it?
Yeah.
He does sound like a great guy to have at your six. Yeah. When you're writing, what assails your ears?
Yeah, I love your use of that word assails, because that instantly brings to mind certain things. But for me, quite honestly, usually nothing. I do a lot of writing in my professional life, and so it's technical writing that's done in an office in a professional setting. And so that's kind of when I go to write fiction, I kind of just fall into that rhythm, because it's something that I'm used to doing all the time. I mean, when you do it 8 hours a day, and then on the weekend you're like, hey, let's take an hour and write something, you automatically fall into that rhythm, right? For me personally, I know there are a lot of writers that will use theme music to kind of guide their writing, to help them capture the emotions and everything as they move forward. For me, mostly if I'm dealing with music, it's going to be about a scene. There's going to be a scene that's going to have something playing in the background in the back of my mind, where I pick up on it and I try to capture that during that particular scene, but not the story in total.
Okay.
The one exception to that, the story that I did, Bone in the Croin, that one, that to me, that was kind of like the lone gunman in a Sergio Leone Western.
Okay.
And so I had the wonderful soundtrack music from Hugo Montenegro and the various movies that he had done playing in the back of my head the whole time. Because to me, that story was, this singular loner navigating his way through the complexities of a political situation, and the conflicts between various groups. And he had to navigate it on his own. He didn't have any backup. He didn't have anybody with his six. He had to kind of do it on his own. And so that theme song, or those theme songs, kind of played in the back of my mind the whole time.
Interesting. All right. Well, if you haven't read that story, you're giving them tons of reasons to today. Hey, if you could live in a yellow submarine, would you?
Hell no. There is no way. Number one, I'm claustrophobic. Number two, my biggest fear is that I will drown someday. I am scared to death of drowning. And so, I mean, there's a reason I ended up in the Army and not the Navy. I don't mind people shooting at me, but I don't want to have to worry about drowning too. So you can have the water all you want. I'm happy for you to do it. Thank God we have the Navy SEALs, but I'm going to be on land. That's where I'm going to live.
I'll be interested to see if you ever write a scene with a hero struggling in water.
That may be a little too emotional for me. I mean, my PTSD may kick in.
Well, let's swing over to that question then. Do you think it makes writing more difficult or somewhat easier if a writer feels emotions strongly?
Well, I think it absolutely, I don't know if it makes it easier for the author, but it definitely makes it resonate more for the reader, I believe. I think you can tell when an author is emotionally invested in something. I think it comes across and the reader identifies with that. It resonates with them. Because I feel the same thing in all the arts, right? The visual arts. We talked about Frank Frazetta.
Mm-hmm.
I think Frank Frazetta felt every one of those paintings, and he put those emotions into it. Same thing with music, right? I mean, there's how many thousands, hundreds, millions of songs out there, but we all know when one comes on that the artist either wrote or is emotionally connected to, you can immediately tell the difference in the resonance of their voice, in the way that they portray it, in the way it comes across. Those things connect with us, and those are the ones that become the classics, right?
Yep.
I mean, nobody's ever going to have a classic copy of Bebop Diddy because it doesn't mean anything, right? But you get Stairway to Heaven, and you're like, holy crap, yeah, this thing resonates. I understand it. This connects with me. So, yeah, I think emotions definitely play a part. I'm not sure it makes it easier for the author, but it definitely connects with the reader, I think. They can tell. I mean, people know. You understand that stuff.
Yeah, good point. All right. What nonfiction do you enjoy reading?
I tend to read a lot of history. Again, I'm a historian by training. If you come and look at my house, I've got, I think, close to 2,000 volumes that range anywhere from the ancient Hellenic Greeks and Romans all the way up to, the wars in Iraq and Afghanistan and biographies all the way through in between. Here lately, I've been focusing a lot on World War II. There have been a lot of new books that have come out about stuff in World War II that have really fascinated me. That's a period in history that I just find fascinating, not just for the battles themselves, but in the way societies dealt with that World War. So one of them is, I'm reading this book called Commando Country. Probably boring for anybody else. But for me, it resonates because it is a book about how Britain switched after the fall of Dunkirk and they were pushed back off the mainland. They had to find military training sites and they needed places to train folks. And they wanted to, Churchill was adamant that he wanted to strike back immediately. He wanted to, stop doing the defensive war and to get back at the Germans immediately, which meant small scale raiding parties. And so the British came up with this concept called the commandos, that they were going to train, that would then go do amphibious raids along the coast of Europe and keep the Germans off kilt as they were trying to figure out back and forth where the next strike was going to come. But they didn't have any training bases. So they looked for mountainous terrain that had easy access to the sea, that was good for amphibious operations, that was sparsely populated so you could use live weapons. And they settled in the Highlands of Scotland. And what they did is they went up to the landed aristocracy that were up there and requisitioned their estates and said, hey, we're going to take over your 2,000 acres and turn it into a training area. And that Commando Country kind of lays out all of the different things that took place there. Very amazing to me how the government was able to shift and how the people were so supportive of the war effort that they would give up, landed estates that have been in their family for hundreds of years in order to further the war effort. And it's got a personal connection to me. The Ranger Regiment, which was my regiment in the Army, they started there with Darby's Rangers in World War II and trained at Achnacarry, Scotland. And last year when I was in Scotland, I went to the Commando Memorial and got to visit there, which is literally in the middle of nowhere. It's off to the side of the highway. If you blink as you go past, you'll never even see it. But it recognizes that tradition and all those things that occurred. And then the second one that I'm reading right now, in the similar vein, because I always read more than one book at a time, it's called The Viking Battalion. And it represents the same type of innovation. At the time, in the beginning of World War II, it looked like Norway was maybe a vulnerable area within the Nazi regime. It wasn't as well defended or populated as the other areas. So the U.S. and Britain looked at trying to invade there. And consequently, they recruited a bunch of Norwegian Americans, because of their language skills, because of their skiing skills, because of their ability to deal in the Arctic. And they were planning on launching a full-scale invasion of Norway. By the time they got trained, the war had moved on, and those guys ended up dispersed across the rest of the Army. A lot of them went to the 1st Special Service Force, also known as the Devil's Brigade, which people may have seen the movie, or in Darby's Rangers, which again was another great movie starring James Garner that you could check out. But these guys ended up across the Special Operations Force in the U.S. Army. And it's just fascinating to me how governments were able to innovate, to take advantage, to try different things, because we see so little of that now, right? Now we're all stuck in the bureaucratic, we have to go through and do these forms and see what happens, where back then they just made stuff happen. So I find that part fascinating.
I have a World War II collection too, about not 2,000, probably 500 or 600 books. But I read a really fascinating book on the Devil's Brigade several years ago, and then also on the Canadian American training that Joint Country did up there in the borderlands. In preparation for that, but then they ended up getting dispersed too. So, but
I think it was Fort Henry. It was either Fort Henry or Fort Henry Jackson there in Montana, because they still have a reunion there every year.
Oh, dang. Fascinating. And I can see how that influences a lot of the stuff that you write, the things I've read of yours. I call your heroic fantasy writing earthy. You're very boots on the ground, at home in the terrain, and you're writing what you lived and what you like to study. Totally swinging to another degree here. What is the funniest thing you can share with us right now?
Let's see. All my dad jokes, so I can't do that.
Okay, Dad.
I guess I will bring up something that was. You may find this humorous. A lot of our listeners may not.
Okay.
So, I mean, you and I, we come from a first responder military perspective, and we know that black humor helps you get through the day, right? You've got that dark humor that only when you've been there do you understand it, because otherwise it just sounds morbid. But I was reminded of this. I was just talking to a friend of mine, Eric Gomez, who brought it up to me again. And it's probably apocryphal, but the story goes back to Audie Murphy, another great Texican who was there in World War II. And Audie was supposedly sitting in a foxhole with one of his buddies, and there were German bullets and shells whistling overhead and busting everything up. And his buddy turns to him and says, "Hey, it's not very healthy out here. I'm not sure we should stick around." And Audie supposedly refers back to him and says, "Don't worry, they can kill you, but they can't eat you." And so that became kind of the calling stone of, hey, you may die, but they're not going to eat you. So it's not that bad.
Okay. That could be a dad joke too, though, I guess.
That is definitely a dad joke.
Oh, let's see here. Would you live in any of your worlds? Which and why?
Yeah, I think I would live in any of them. I mean, I'm very comfortable. I mean, my kids talk about it all the time. I mean, we've been traveling nomads. I mean, I was in the Army for 38 years. We moved all over the place. I've been to all 50 states. I've been to 24 countries. My kids have lived all over the place. And whether it's the Arctic, whether it's the jungle, whether it's the forested woodlands, whether it's the desert, it's kind of funny because I sunburn under a street lamp, but it seems like the Army's sent me half my life away into the desert. So, but yeah, I'm comfortable in any of those places. I mean, I've joked with my wife. I'm like, you could send me back 200 years, 500 years, 2,000 years in the past, and I'd be okay with that. I'm pretty sure I could find a job in the Roman legions if I landed back there. The only two things I would miss would be carbonated beverages and hot showers. Other than that, I'd be fine.
No indoor plumbing other than the hot water?
Well, yeah. When I look back on it, I've probably had indoor plumbing less than half my life. The rest of the time, I was just out there. Yeah, you had an e-tool and a roll of toilet paper, and that's what you did your business with.
All right, you definitely put things in perspective. What is the best thing you have ever spent money on to further your writing?
Well, in the first place, because it's a hobby, I don't spend money on my writing. But when I did, the best thing I ever spent it on was a red ink pen. Being able to go back and self-edit, that's huge. Being able to mark that up. And because I'm old, I can't do that on the screen, right? But track changes on Word drives me nuts. It's just distracting. It's psychedelic noise that I just don't need. So I have to print it out and go through, and then I use the red ink pen to edit myself, make sure, where did I miss something? What do I need to fill in? Where did I misspell something? What do I need to add to this? So that red ink pen, I mean, that 89 cents is probably the best money I've ever spent on writing.
Great unexpected answer. I love it. When you're finished writing, are you exhausted and just want a hot bath and a good drink, or are you pumped and ready to rumble?
No, I'm pumped and ready to rumble. I mean, writing to me, it's not work, it's fun. And that's probably why I have such low productivity, because I only do it when it's fun, right? I don't sit down every morning and crunch out 2,000 words like a professional does. I do it when I feel it, when I got the mood on me, when I do it. And when I get done, I'm like, yeah, man, I got something on the paper. This is awesome. So for me, it's a hobby that pays like a hobby. So I'm not going to emotionally pour myself out into it. I'm going to enjoy the ride.
Very good. Who do you think writes the characters you enjoy reading most?
Well, there are three folks that come to mind. So the first is Robert E. Howard. I love his characters. I immediately connect with them, and it doesn't matter which one it is, which probably says something about his voice and the way he communicates across the board. Because it doesn't matter whether it's Conan, Cole, Dark Agnes, Cormac McArt, Bran McMorn, all of those characters I can relate to. I may not feel the same way that they do, but I understand why they feel that way. I understand their motivations. I understand what they do. The second one is Louis L'Amour. Okay. In all of his books, that guy is able to draw characterization that is absolutely amazing to me. And I automatically identify with it, because if you read a Louis L'Amour story, those are people that I know. I can relate back to old timers that I knew that grew up. I mean, I used to deliver papers to a guy that did one of the last great cattle drives, and he would always have a quarter for me because he said a young man always should have some money. And he would tell me stories about, picking the maggots out of the the Biscuits and the Weevils and everything. And I knew some of those guys. And more importantly, in my career during the military, I met those same people. Those are the people, the men and women that go out there, that make stuff happen, that grasp life and shake it by its roots and say, this is how I'm going to make things happen. So I already recognize them. And then the third one, the modern author that resonates the most with me is Bernard Cornwell. Okay. That guy I think is fantastic. I think he is the finest living historical author that we have. And it doesn't matter. He goes across the spectrum in the different books that he has, whether it's Richard Sharp in the Napoleonic Wars or whether it's Uhtred of Bebbanburg in the Saxon Chronicles. His characters just resonate with you. I mean, they're open, they have flaws, but you understand their motivations. You can sympathize with them. You cry with them when things go wrong, and you cheer when they actually have something good happen. He does a fantastic job of doing that, while blending them with real history, which is a huge challenge. That's an amazing ability.
Okay, three pretty big names definitely had an influence on you. We're gonna jump to 10 first thoughts.
I'm
going to throw 10 words out at you, and I want the first thing that comes in your head to respond to each one. Ready?
Okay.
Swordfish.
Snout.
Snow.
Cloud.
Futuristic.
Robot.
Raspberry.
Tart.
Risk.
Averse.
Bounty.
Hunter.
Wasp.
Sting.
Swift.
Sword.
Purple.
People eater.
Jagged.
Edge.
What were your 3 favorite books as a child?
Let's see. My 3 favorite books as a child. So number 1 would probably be Hondo by Louis L'Amour.
Okay.
Just a fantastic book. It is probably, I would throw it out there to any aspiring author as the best example of how to build characterization. The character he builds as Hondo, the depth that he gives him, the level of detail that he gives him, carries the entire book. It's a fairly mundane story if you look at the plot line, but you care about it because you care about that character. Mm-hmm. And he draws you in. And even though, it's fairly predictable, you understand what's going on, you don't care. You want to find out what's going on because you want to know what's going to happen with him. You want to know what he's going to experience. And so you follow that character. The second one would probably be the Princess of Mars by Edgar Rice Burroughs, John Carter. Love that one. Always was reading that one over and over again. I think they did a fantastic job when they remade it into the movie here recently. Yeah. They really captured the spirit of that. But that, to a young boy, the idea of traveling to Mars and, dueling with 4-armed green giants and winning a princess, that was, loved that. Couldn't get enough of it. So I had to go back to it again and again. And then probably the last one, and I know the sword and sorcery purists are going to be rolling their eyes. But I mean, I loved the Conan series of books that came out from Robert E. Howard, the ones that were edited by L. Sprague de Camp and Lynn Carter. I know they're not Howard purists, and they absolutely don't stand up to that in hindsight. But to a 12-year-old boy, that was pure escapist adventure. And I would read the entire series, go from 1 all the way to the end, and then turn around and start back at page 1 again and read it the second time. Huh. So, I mean, those are the books that I returned to again and again when I was young. I really got into them when I was probably around 9 or 10. And I'm sure I had read each one of those things at least 5 times by the time I was 18.
All right. That's good. That's a good smorgasbord. We are running out of time here. 39 minutes. What is the most difficult thing you have ever written?
Comedy. The story I did for You and As You Wish, comedy is super hard because people perceive comedy differently, particularly in the written page. I mean, we've all done those emails where we thought we gave a pithy comment and it just pisses the other person off.
Yeah.
So yeah, writing comedy is tough.
Agreed. Are you trying to share anything in your writing?
Mostly I'm just trying to tell stories. I mean, I don't consider myself a writer. I don't have a grand message. I don't have a moral theme. I'm just telling stories that I hope would entertain people and you know, make them happy and think about, hey, I like that character. That's a good guy. I can recognize something in that I've seen here in other people or in myself. So I'm just trying to tell stories.
Yep. And those are my favorite authors. In my history of anthologies, I always talk about storytellers. I definitely think you're a good storyteller. If you could write anyone else's character from any medium, who would it be and why?
That would be Robert E. Howard's Solomon Kane. That
Ah,
guy's always fascinated me. I know he turns a lot of people off because of his extremism. I mean, you want to talk about a fundamental fanatic? That's him, right? The
yeah.
Puritanism that he has, his drive for justice, and what he perceives as justice in God's eye. But to me, that's also fascinating. I would love to explore that,
Huh.
trying to figure out what makes him tick, how that drives him forward, because there's a price to pay for that, right? When you're that committed to a particular thing, you give up other aspects of your personality, of your life
Yeah.
that you're just not going to fit in anymore.
Right.
And so exploring that to me would be fun.
Have you? Have you tried?
I haven't.
Okay.
Probably something I should try.
It'd be
And then I'll
interesting.
get sued by the Howard Foundation and
No,
I'll lose all
personally.
my money. And
Yeah, personally, no one has to see it. I'm just curious if you tried to do it for yourself.
I'm sure they're watching me. There's probably a drone outside right now recording this.
Yeah, you're on their radar. Okay. All right. Two questions left. Do you have a favorite quote and will you share it?
Yes, I've got a favorite quote. It's kind of long. You probably know it. It's very popular in the special operations community in the military. It's a quote from Teddy Roosevelt that comes from a speech he gave on citizenship.
Okay.
Um, but it talks about, what it takes to put yourself out there. So the quote goes, "It's not the critic who counts, not the man who points out how the strong man stumbles, or where the doer of deeds could have done them better. The credit belongs to the man who is actually in the arena, whose face is marred by dust and sweat and blood, who strives valiantly, who errs, who comes short again and again, because there is no effort without error and shortcoming, but who does actually strive to do the deeds, who knows the great enthusiasms, the great devotions, who spends himself in a worthy cause, who at the best knows in the end the triumph of high achievement, and who at the worst, if he fails, at least fails while daring greatly, so that his place shall never be with those cold and timid souls who know neither victory nor defeat." So that's something that's always resonated with me. It's about putting yourself out there. It's about taking those chances. It resonates with me as a member of the Ranger Regiment because we have to be 3-time volunteers. You have to volunteer for the military. You have to volunteer for airborne training, and you have to volunteer for Ranger training.
Yep.
So our motto is sua sponte, of their own accord. And so when I think of these guys that, hey, I'm going to step forward, I'm going to put myself out there, I'm going to take those chances. Those men and women that do that stuff, they have my utmost respect and admiration.
Yeah. That is not a quote you can just rattle off, though.
No. And I'm sure there is an English professor right now who is like, oh, this is the worst run-on sentence I have ever seen in my career.
No, it's definitely a motivating one. All right, last question. It's very important. Ice cream, pie, cake, or creme brulee?
Creme brulee all day long. That is the dessert. I love it. I only get it on special occasions. It's not something that I ever make myself. It's not something you can find normally in any restaurant. It's something that you have to order specially, and it's usually done on a special occasion. So creme brulee for sure.
Awesome. Man after my own heart. All right. Looks like we hit about 44 minutes. We scooted just a smidge over. You,
Yeah, sorry.
oh no, I was me talking too much. You get to close with the last three. I'm sorry, the last thing you get to close with is the three C's of your works: something cold, something current, and something coming. Something cold.
All right, something cold. I've got several Sigurd Grimbrow stories, a character that I've reprised with Rogue Blades a couple of times. I've got sitting in the can. I've just never submitted them to anybody. So I'm working on maybe putting those together into an anthology and releasing it myself.
Cool.
Current, I've got Neither Beg Nor Yield. My story, Bone in the Croin, is in there. There are a lot better authors that have a lot better stories, but mine kind of slides in there in the middle. So hopefully people will enjoy it and, go back and look at the other ones because they're definitely better than mine. And then coming up, I'm working on another Fergus McRonan story set in medieval Ireland that I hope to release for potential publication here in the future.
Spectacular. And don't beat yourself up, man. Getting a lot of good comments on your story there in Neither Beg Nor Yield. All right,
Well,
Jeff.
there are a lot of guys in there that I idolize, so I'm just happy to be in the company.
Well, I appreciate you taking the time to do this with us. This was a spectacular interview. You gave some great answers and lots of things for people to look into. You have yourself a great day.
All right, take care.
My thanks to Jeff for being the first of my interviews. We went 2 minutes over due to my yapping, which I'll work on for the next interview. Be sure to read over the material included below and even boost Jeff's signal with some review thoughts. Until next time, this was 24 in 42.